As preseason injuries pile up for the Phoenix Suns and the bench continues to be a question mark, Jae Crowder rumors are flying. And on today's episode of Locked On Suns, we'll break down the latest lengthy report detailing why the Suns did what they did with Crowder and where this could go from here. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 5 seasons and a writer at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. Thank you all for making Locked On Suns your first listen. Happy Thursday. We are almost to the end of another week, which means we are one day closer to the start of Suns basketball next week, less than 1 week from today. That is something to celebrate for sure. If you're just tuning in for the first time, hit follow or subscribe. Make sure we're in your feed every single day. If it's not your first time and you haven't done that either, shame on you. Go ahead and do it yourself. If you're on YouTube, hit the little bell at the bottom of the video here. Make sure you get notified every time that a video comes out. And drop me a comment down below. Tell me where you think Jae Crowder is headed, because it feels like we're headed finally towards some sort of relaxation here. Like we're going to be able to breathe. The Crowder deal, it feels like it might happen. We'll get into it. We'll have some observations. I know the Suns played a preseason game. They're losing as I'm recording this. It's the fourth quarter. None of the starters played, so I'll give you my quick hit observations at the end of the show, but we won't spend too much time on it. Let's hit this Crowder thing. Jake Fisher, who just moved over to Yahoo, we've been talking about a lot of his reporting all summer, whether it was Kevin Durant or Deandre Ayton. And now he has a lot of intel, a pretty big piece specifically focused on Crowder. And I kind of like Jake's angle on it. I mean, he was really looking at, like, why did this happen? And so some of the new info we got in here. One, I think the reason Jake wrote the piece, other NBA teams were pretty surprised, it seems like, that the Suns let Crowder effectively hold out, right? Like, that's what he's doing. Maybe we're not calling it that, but, like, if this was an NFL skill position guy, we'd be calling it a holdout. It's just, I guess, the way it all went down and the Suns kind of playing ball with it made it seem like less of a holdout. But the bottom line is he basically seemed like he threatened to not show up. That's a holdout. And the Suns said okay, which is surprising. It also seems like other NBA teams have gotten a pretty clear message that the Suns either want one player or a combination of players who will be difference makers in the short term. Somebody who they can bring onto their team right now who will help, which isn't exactly a surprise, but I guess reassuring to hear if you're a Suns fan who doesn't want them to get worse, which is obviously in the preseason at some different moments what it's looked like that might happen is if they can't get a replacement, that they're one guy short, they're one player down, and that's obviously a recipe to be a little bit worse. A few other things. Dallas and Memphis not interested. The Suns aren't expected to make a deal in the West. But the big things here were, of course, the players that the Suns are interested in, the players that they've actually talked about, right? So one of those was Derek White, which if you've been listening to this show, you know I've been clamoring, frankly, for the Suns to go out and get Derek White. It feels like a no-brainer. It's one of the only players we've talked about who I think would be worth giving up a first-round pick, would actually help the number one problem that the Suns seem to have, which is a lack of shot creation and ball handling in the second unit. White could provide that. We also heard Bogdan Bogdanovic, which if you listened to yesterday's show, Shams Charania had sort of gotten jump on that reporting and said that the Hawks and the Suns had been talking. Bogdan felt like the natural guy there. There's a few other options. We'll talk about those in a moment. The Suns have, quote, held talks about trading for KJ Martin, which, if you want to feel old, that's Kenyon Martin Jr. from the Rockets. He was a subject of some jokes last season because he requested a trade and he's like a second-round pick and a young player. But Pretty promising guy. It didn't necessarily, honestly, even feel like those talks were related directly to the Crowder thing. It was sort of like, this is the type of player or the type of deal that they've explored just to contextualize where the Suns' mindset is what I read about that, what I read from that. And then last but not least, the Suns have quote-unquote inquired about Jordan Clarkson, another player who it does not take a rocket scientist to predict, but again, we've talked about a lot on this show with Utah just having their fire sale and Clarkson being obviously not the most ideal fit with how Monty Williams likes his offense to run. He doesn't tend to have shot chuckers out on the floor, but still, the Suns need somebody like that, whether it's natural and convenient and comfortable or not, so Clarkson is not a huge surprise there. My take on all this is, it's a few things, but at the bottom line, I think the way, whether or not the Suns can land the plane on this, it's going to probably have a lot to do with how their season goes. I don't want to say it's going to make or break their season, because I think the way that their top 4 players play is going to have a whole lot more to do with the end result of their season, but they are not a deep team right now. They are not a very versatile or scary team when it comes to their bench right now, and those things they're inarguable. They're obvious. Anybody who's watched this team in the preseason could say that. So they need to do something here. They need to get it right. I think the Suns, from reading this report, and we'll talk about James Jones specifically and where his head might be, but it seems like, big picture, they feel like they have enough options to eventually make a deal that they like. Because it is a little bit shocking that they just allowed Crowder to sit at home, not knowing for sure that they would have a deal, right? They didn't make a deal, right away. They let him go home. They said, we'll figure this out. And so to me, that publicly is exuding some confidence that they feel comfortable they'll find something. They haven't yet, but it seems like they think they will. Everyone seems to be expecting a trade before camp. There was at least one person quoted in Fisher's piece today that was saying the same thing. Monty Williams has said publicly that his hope, I think is the word that he used, was that they could have a deal in place by opening night next week. I'm not sure on that. I've sort of been skeptical talking about it on the podcast, but it would at least explain the Suns being willing again to let him stay home. If they knew they had a good deal and they had a deal that they could get done quickly, then it makes sense that they would just avoid the hassle, avoid the controversy, avoid the stress of having somebody who's not happy be around your team. And I think the last part of this is the Suns see this as an opportunity to change up the structure of the team, to get a little bit younger, to add some more ball handling, maybe both with somebody like White, right? The fact that they are, even Bogdanović, like he's 30, but that's younger than Crowder, right? Like that's younger than Chris Paul. So I think that, and I'm personally excited to see that. I think that's the way that this should be approached, and it's the types of deals that I have put out there are ones that increase the asset pool. That's a very nerdy term, but like keep the barrel of monkeys that you might have, in terms of picks and contracts and all this stuff to pull from as long as you can. And like right now, Crowder as a player is incredibly valuable, but he's on as an expiring contract. He's older. The Suns clearly seem to think he's getting worse. So pursuing players that are younger, pursuing players that have a little bit more time on their contracts, players who might be not quite as expensive, all that stuff is what I thought they should do. And I think that they could actually even get better while doing that. And that seems to be where James Jones' mindset is. So what's his end game? That's my take. That's what the people Jake Fisher reported with. That's their take. What's James Jones' end game? We'll talk about that next. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by BetOnline, your number one source for football betting info all year long. That's right. Every football game. Latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, in-depth articles, and analysis on every game you can find. BetOnline remains your continued source for sports wagering info, of course, as well, with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there, including your week 6 odds. The Cardinals, it feels like their game is going to get moved. It feels chaotic. The Mariners are just taking over Seattle by playing so well, even though they lost game 1 of their series. And we're sitting in a situation now where the Cardinals are somehow favored on the road against Geno Smith and the upstart Seattle Seahawks minus Russell Wilson. I don't know how their team is playing as well as they are. I also don't know how the Cardinals are 3-point favorites on the road in Seattle, which is still a hard place to play, even if the team's not quite as good as it used to be. I don't get it. Maybe you do. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including football, baseball, fights, golf, basketball, all of it. Head to betonline.net. Use your mobile app to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so James Jones, obviously, the man. I said it's, how they land the plane on this could make or break the season, or at least have a lot to do with the end result of the season. And the guy who's the pilot of that plane is James Jones. So what's his end game? What's he doing? What's he up to? Like, we can do the Windhorst pointing into the sky on first take stuff and that meme, and it's not too far off from where we are right now with the Suns. But where I look, once again, is the players that have been linked to the Suns. Not, Bojan Bogdanovic, not really Jordan Clarkson, right? But pretty much everybody else. Derek White, Jared Vanderbilt, who we know they were in on with the Utah talks, KJ Martin, even Bogdan Bogdanovic to a lesser degree. You can see the Suns are clearly pursuing players who will hold value into the future. They, right now, it seems to me, view Crowder as being on the downside of his career, and they want to use this trade as a way to extend the lifespan of that asset, right? And I know James Jones would not like that terminology, but what's funny about that, he doesn't like to say asset. They're players, they're people, they're human beings. I get that. Clearly do not disagree with any of that. But what's funny is, he likes to use that lingo and correct people or frame things the right way. But he is handling this as any GM would, right? This is, exhibit 1 of what a general manager's job is. So just keep that in mind. I'm not picking a fight with James Jones here, but it is sort of funny. They're agreeing for a player to stay home. They're telling a player after a solid season that he just did have that he's not going to be the starter, that they're not going to extend him, and now they're kind of playing hardball on a trade. This is what general managers do. Like it or not, these guys are assets. And so, with someone like White or Vanderbilt, the Suns are likely planning, whether they're planning or not, they likely would have had to give up a first-round pick in a trade like that. So that also tells us something, right? In that case, you're looking at it as getting someone back who, like I said, helps sort of rejuvenate and mix up what your team looks like. But looking forward, and the reason I'm focused on these assets and the future and everything else is the Suns have not flushed the toilet on a big star trade. We've talked about Kevin Durant that's an understatement. We've talked about Kevin Durant on this podcast. We spent a whole summer talking about Kevin Durant on this podcast. We've also mentioned Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Who knows what the next guy might be that becomes available? We just saw this summer Donovan Mitchell, DeJounte Murray, Rudy Gobert, all these guys. Every year there's another one. And so the Suns want to have the ammunition to go get those guys, just like they were able to pursue Durant because they had enough to offer in a trade. They can do the same going forward if they keep their assets strong. They have Bridges, they have Ayton, they have Johnson, they have a lot of picks, they have some salaries. But if you give up a first-round pick for somebody like, Jordan Clarkson, for instance, that player is probably not going to have value in a trade down the line. And so to me, you look at, Vanderbilt himself, for instance, in the Gobert trade, when he came from the Timberwolves to the Jazz as part of what the package that the Jazz were getting back for Gobert, he basically stood in as another equivalent to a first-round pick or close to it, right? You saw Ochai Agbaji in the Donovan Mitchell trade. That's a guy that the Cavs had just selected in the draft, and then suddenly he's being packaged and sent to the Jazz as a stand-in for, the equivalent of another first-round pick. Walker Kessler was another one, similar thing, who went from Minnesota to Utah. So the Suns, to me, they can navigate both paths at one time. They can have Vanderbilt, who I think would be a really, I don't think he's on the table anymore. I'm just using him as an example. White could be another one, right? Kenyon Martin Jr. could potentially even be another one, depending on how good he could get, where they could really help the team now, but they could also be somebody where if Kevin Durant becomes available again, if Damian Lillard decides he finally wants to leave, whatever it is, Anthony Davis, who knows, that those guys could then also be part of the package that you might put together there. So I think that's what James Jones is trying to do. He knows the team needs to change, but he knows they also still need to stay flexible, right? So that's the flight path, right? If he's trying to land the plane and he's the pilot, we're following this metaphor. Will it work? Will the wheels of the plane stick out of the bottom when they need to? Will everything hit the ground safely? Well, I think to me, we either see a pretty big trade for someone like Derek White, or we see a pretty small trade for, if we're going back to Atlanta, which is one of the only teams we've really seen referenced in a tangible way in multiple different reports now. An example of a small trade with them would be Justin Holiday, who could fill the Crowder role to a degree, and Jalen Johnson, who was their 2021 first-round pick, sort of like an athletic big man, has some upside, didn't play a lot last year. He looks like he's ready to play this year. And you get a project big man, maybe your backup center long-term. Maybe a good starting caliber center that, again, becomes somebody you can trade down the line. So I doubt we would see the Suns use a first-round pick to swing for something in the middle. Again, pretty big trade or pretty small trade is where I'm seeing things right now because, again, trading a first for Clarkson or Bogdanovich, either one of the Bogdanoviches, it's the worst of all the worlds, right? Because you're giving up a lot and you're not getting back somebody who's going to be impactful or valuable down the line. Unless they save a lot of money. That's the one place where I could see it. Like in some of the reporting around the Bogdanovich trade with Atlanta, it would have been Crowder and Shamet, where in that case the Suns are saving about $2 million, which in the luxury tax equates to even more than that. So I think that's one area, but I just mostly don't see it. I think this will work, though. With all that said, for Jones, as long as he's willing to be patient after all. There should be even more options once teams start playing and injuries and reps kind of highlight what teams might need. All of that said, I think it can work. I think those are the two ways it will work. The big trade or the small trade, not the middle. All of that said, though, patience, planning, the best of intentions, none of that might matter if Cam Johnson's thumb injury is legit. I don't know how serious it is. I want to assume it's not that big of a deal. I don't know if maybe it's not even that the current thumb injury that he's been out for the preseason with is necessarily super inhibiting for him, but maybe it's he re-injures it, or maybe if something like that happens, the Suns get very desperate very quickly, and they probably just have to take the best deal they can find. So we'll know more about Cam's injury and his health situation soon. We'll also know about his extension situation soon. But again, I think Jones is on the right track. He seems to be confident that he can make a deal. We know the Suns need some help. I think they can be a little patient. I don't know how patient. I think this injury will have a lot to do with how patient they can truly be. All right, let's rifle through some takeaways from this last preseason game. The score just went final as I'm recording, 105-104, the Kings win. Second straight one-possession loss in preseason. Very strange for the Phoenix Suns. I'll give you my quick takeaways. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by one of my favorite new sponsors, which is My Solar Nerd. They know that if you live in Arizona, like I do, you've probably, most likely, had somebody knock on your door and say, hey, you want some free solar? We'll do it all for you. Well, a lot of those companies, they're not even local. They don't actually know what it takes to get the job done here. and they're using misleading tactics. They're overcharging you. Yeah, overcharging for something that's free. Yeah, any money when it's supposed to be free is a screw over. But My Solar Nerd doesn't do any of that. Their mission is simple: help you get the best solar system to fit your needs. The guys at mysolarnerd.com are local, and they understand the nuances of going solar here in Arizona. They've been at it for a while here locally, and they understand that an educated customer is a happy customer, and their no-pressure approach will make sure all your questions get answered. Once you're ready, they'll put their industry knowledge to work for you by choosing the best equipment, warranties, and installers in their network. They'll also help you figure out all the credits and incentives that you may qualify for to make sure that your transition to solar is as smooth as possible. Our listeners will get a $50 Amazon gift card when they book a no-commitment evaluation. Again, our listeners only and homeowners only. Unfortunately, no solar panels on your apartment complex, no matter how much money you might save, unfortunately, out of all of us renters' hands. But homeowners, Locked On listeners, visit mysolarnerd.com, select Locked On in the How'd You Hear About Us section, take advantage of this offer, and make the switch to solar on your terms. Start your research process now by visiting mysolarnerd.com and show Locked On some love by letting them know we sent you. Folks, going solar does not need to be complicated, and mysolarnerd.com makes it easy. I have 5 rapid fire observations from the Suns' 105-104 loss to the Sacramento Kings. Weird preseason. We can all agree, right? The Adelaide loss, bizarre, hot shooting, dramatic criticism online, all of it, craziness. Beating the Lakers, always good. And then 2 incredibly down-to-the-wire preseason games that ended up in losses. I don't know. I don't think the results matter, but there were some things because the Suns starters were all out, as I said before. No Chris Paul, no Devin Booker, no Deandre Ayton, no Mikal Bridges, and then obviously Johnson, Shamet, Payne were all still out with injury, and Dario Saric is now away from the team for personal reasons that understandably have not been elaborated on, but it's a little bit confusing where things stand right now with him. But that meant a lot of time for other guys. So all of my observations, of course, are on those guys. First, Dwayne Washington, who's going to be the number one highlight of this game, the number one headline from this game, 31 points, 4 assists, 10 of 19 shooting, got to the free throw line 11 times, had a nice dunk at one point, had some nice shot making, pick and roll maestro. 11 turnovers, which is a little ugly, but it's growing pains. He played 39 minutes, so per minute, not quite as bad as, it might sound. The observation on him, though, is he's not just a scorer. I mean, he only had 4 assists today, but he can really pass it in the pick and roll. He has just about every pass in those situations. He can hit the roll man with, a pass over the top of the defense. He can hit the roll man dumping it off with a drop pass, a bounce pass like that, hitting the guy in stride. He can kick it to the corner. He can sort of coax the defense toward him and then hit somebody for a lob. He has almost all of that in him, and he's pretty comfortable doing it. So he, as an offensive player, I think making his teammates better, understanding pace, knowing the Suns' offensive sets that they might want to run, knowing when to freewheel versus when to call a play, all that stuff, that's still coming. I've talked about that with Monty Williams. Really, Monty is especially going to want to see that from him. Monty is a stickler about backup point guards. We've seen that forever, and he's going to want to see all that stuff. But as a talent, as a well-rounded offensive creator, I think Washington's really solid for how little experience he has in the NBA. Number 2, Damian Lee's going to play a lot, especially if the Crowder situation lingers for this team, or, again, if any of these injuries become problems, whether it's Payne, Shamet, or Cam Johnson. I think Lee is going to be, maybe number 1 in line to play more, because he can play so many different roles, right? He can be more of a defensive player for you if you need him to, because he's a legit 6'5". He's a good defender for what he is. He can be more of a shooter. He can be somebody who handles the ball a little bit here and there. I think his Swiss Army knife nature means he's going to be one of the first guys who gets called upon. I think he's going to be in the rotation opening night anyway, even if those guys are healthy, but especially if they're not, the minutes are just going to pile up. Ish Wainwright, little weird small thing with him is he'll have a long stretch sometimes where he just doesn't make a huge impact on the game. The first 11 minutes that he played tonight, like you look at his final box score, you're probably thinking I'm crazy because he actually filled it up quite a bit tonight. But he played 34 minutes. The first 11, so basically his whole first stint on the floor and then some, he had 0 field goal attempts, not makes, attempts, 0 assists, 1 rebound, and 1 steal. Now, he followed that up with a nice stretch in the second half, but he's not going to get 34 minutes a game to get into rhythm, to feel things out like he did tonight. He's going to have to make an impact in some way to get minutes, even if it's just 15. He's going to have to take advantage and do something when he's out there. And I'm not saying box score stats are the only way to do things, but when you're as big as he is, when you're out there for defense, 1 rebound is just not going to do it. Not like steals always have to be there, but you got to make your impression felt. And there's a lot of time when you don't notice him out there. And it's honestly pretty far from what he was last year. So that's part of why I'm noticing it. I don't know. It's something I'm going to keep my eye on more going forward. Number 4, Monty said, this is just random. Monty said in the post, it was like a commercial break or like a coming back from a break little interview segment. Maybe it was between the first and second quarter. I don't even remember. That Josh Okogie broke the team record for miles per hour in practice. Apparently this is a competition that the Suns do. Mikhail had the record, according to Monty. It was at 19 point something. And then this week at camp, allegedly, according to Monty, Josh Okogie broke that record. Now, I have some questions. I think kind of surprised Elfrid Payton didn't break it last year. I feel like I'm forgetting. I feel like Book could easily have something to say there. I feel like Cam Payne is somebody. It's surprising to me that Mikhail had the record before, and it's pretty surprising to me that Okogie is the one who broke it. Because, he's small, he's athletic, you could see it, but he's pretty big, so I would think there's just other guys who could move faster than him, but what do I know? Just a strange thing that came up on the broadcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Number 5, last one here. The Suns signed Adonis Arms and Saben Lee yesterday, Tuesday, and they didn't really give either one of those guys playing time in this game. It could just be a matter of getting familiar with them for the future, but other than that, it's very bizarre. Like, my first instinct, both of these guys went to high school. I think they were actually both born in Arizona, and so my first instinct was the Suns must have signed them just to sell some more tickets for this preseason game. Like, get the Mesa Community College crew out, and I can't even remember where Saben Lee went to high school off the top of my head. It was in the East Valley somewhere. His buddies, his family, I do not know what the answer is. It felt like Jimmer Fredette coming on at the end of the 2018 season where the Suns clearly just wanted some BYU alum and other Mormon families to come out to the game. It was very strange, especially to not even put them on the floor. Last thing, though, is Saben Lee does have the same agent as Timothé Luwawu-Cabarrot. That guy is also the agent of Bojan Bogdanovic. I don't know. I'm just getting conspiratorial because I don't have an answer for it. I don't think these guys make the final roster for sure. There's no two-way slots open. It was just a strange thing to see. It doesn't hurt to get guys in your building and just have a relationship with them, with their agents, etc. But you just don't see a lot of teams signing basically training camp deals for the last 2 days, 3 days of camp. Just very strange. Very, very strange. But that'll do it. That is our post-game podcast for Wednesday, October 12th. After this weird loss to the Sacramento Kings, the Suns had a cursed preseason. But that'll do it for today's show, guys. Hit subscribe, hit follow. Do not miss a show. We'll be back maybe with one more to end the week. And then next week, Suns basketball regular season version returns. So you do not want to miss anything. In the meantime, go make Locked On NBA your second listen to catch up on everything else going on around the league.